let's come to Mr. Kenny, right? So my narrative is going to be on democratic crisis, coups, and security challenges, and building peace in Sierra Leone, right? I'm going to start with a quote. Ms. Oge Onubogu, most recently the director of the West African Program at the United States Institute for Peace, a governance and democracy professional with nearly 2 decades experience on Africa and US-African relations. In a recent article published by the Wilson Center on September 5, 2023, titled Africans' Reaction to Disputed Elections and Coups Show Discontent with Democracy, she outlined a complex combination of pressing economic challenges, rising insecurity, and perceived political of electoral processes that has left many Africans feeling disillusioned. So that was her assessment. Then we have another person, right? Ms. Oga continued, identified Sierra Leone as one of the countries that has conducted high-stakes presidential elections, not only for stability and economic development, but also for the future of democracy in Africa. She iterates further that together with the spate of coups in the Sahel and Central Africa, these developments have deep implications for US policy on the continent and underscore the need for redoubled effort to support governance that serves the people and respects their rights. On November 26, 2023, Sierra Leone Information Minister declared an attempted coup where gunmen in the country's capital, Freetown, attacked military barracks and prisons before being overwhelmed by the security forces. On November 28, it was reported that 20 people had been killed in the fighting and that almost 2,000 inmates had escaped. Political tensions in Sierra Leone have been high since June and August, with several soldiers arrested in connection with a coup. Now let's come back to you. Given your professional experience as a security sector practitioner and researcher with over 22 uninterrupted years of service at the strategic level with the security sector of Sierra Leone, and currently the chief of staff, right? Given that the rule of law is critical to development, and based on the level of political tensions in Sierra Leone after the attempted coup, what pragmatic steps and policy measures must be taken towards building peace and promoting social cohesion and a level of security to consolidate democracy? Because in your previous argument, you made that we should focus on human security. What do you think that in a post-election period we should do now going forward to try to lower the political tension and create a semblance of security and peace so as to consolidate democracy and development in Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much for that question. But permit me to note that let me just situate Sierra Leone within context a bit for a proper understanding of the issue before I delve into the question, strictly speaking. Sierra Leone as a country is a country that has had a very checkered socio-political history, post-independence history. You know, issues related to governance, security sector governance, democratization, these are more or less alien in our independence history as a country. Because for a very long time, you know, since independence, you know, been ruled by leaders who, in quotes, are referred to as being concerned about state capture. And even the security sector apparatus, we are much concerned about regime protection rather than a people-centered security. So having had that kind of inclination in our governance structure for almost 30 years since independence, the real first time we actually began, you know, to dwell with this concept of democracy and security sector reform was in 1996. Mind you, also had an 11-year civil war, you know, in which you never talked about development. Sierra Leone retrogressed by further 20 to 30 years down the line, you know. So if you look at our post-conflict security sector reform programs, and by the way, Sierra Leone is one of the countries that have been heralded, you know, when it comes to a success story in terms of SSR. Incidentally, I've been involved at the technical level with our SSR for the past 20 plus years. So I know I'm speaking from an informed position. We actually went through a very comprehensive security sector reform program. We went through a very comprehensive peace building and peace consolidation program. We went through a very comprehensive critical national infrastructure, you know, rehabilitation program as a country. We are the only country that I knew of at that time, when at the same time we are going through peace building, we are going through state reconstruction, we are going through security sector reform, in tandem with all of these issues that I've alluded to. And if you look at it, because we had the UK, mind you, of course, we are a colony of the UK.
Right.
In our SSR program, 95% of our security sector reform and governance reform programs, we are UK-led. We are actually UK-led. Of course, we had UN to come in with some form of technical assistance to UNAMSIL and the like. So post-conflict, 2020, 2002, going down the line, we are able to build critical state institutions, because it came to the realization of the British government that security was a sine qua non to development. There's no way you are going to talk about reconstruction, political stability of Sierra Leone in the absence of a very comprehensive security sector reform program. So went through all of those programs. And as a testament to that, in fact, the British government developed long-term memorandums of understanding in which they completely refurbished, reconstructed, rehabilitated the Ministry of Defense in terms of training, in terms of doctrine, in terms of professionalism. They did the same for the police. For the first time in the history of Sierra Leone, we had a well-coordinated intelligence architecture that can be likened to the CIA. Even the outfit that I work for, that I've worked for since 2001, the Office of National Security, was a post-conflict establishment to ensure that we have civilian oversight of the primary security sector institutions in terms of policy guidance, resource mobilization, and to ensure that they work through the democratic realms and norms of the Constitution. Institutions like the Anti-Corruption Commission, we are set up. Institutions like the Human Rights Council Commission for Sierra Leone, we are set up. National Commission for Democracy, we are set up. All of these we are geared towards maintaining our democratic credentials, And to be very honest with you, the first term of the then president we had immediately after the war, we actually tried to ensure that we strengthen our democratic credentials, that we actually laid emphasis, as I alluded to Inter earlier, when we made our national threat assessment immediately after the war, 90% of our threats were human security related. So we are advising government that let us put in place deliberate policies and programs, because the first PRSP, Poverty Reduction Strategy paper, security and good governance, we are pillar one, to ensure the stability of Sierra Leone. But then post-2007, that was when Sierra Leone began to actually slide back into this whole question of corruption, into this question of state capture, into this question of unprofessionalism, into this question of unbridled political interference into the workings of the security sector, and even the politicization of state institutions. So this whole question that occurred did not start now. It has been fermented over the last 15 years. It only reared its ugly head. And to be very honest with you, as a country going forward, Sierra Leone is a country that has suffered from state capture, because since independence, you've only had two dominant political parties that have governed the political space in Sierra Leone. So most times, if I have this question of local palan, we call ones, we say they are Siamese twins. When this one comes, it's a music and chair. This one comes, it dances, it goes, the other one comes. So this question of, so Sierra Leoneans have become very cynical, you understand? Even with our political class or the political structures that we have, and they become so cynical to the extent that you just think, but we are just going to vote for vote's sake. We know nothing is going to change. We know the status quo is going to remain the same. So that kind of mindset, and with the blatant politicization that we are seeing, in the state institutions that have been established to ensure their independence, to ensure checks and balances, to ensure that even the judiciary remains independent. When you find out that there is a strangulated political hold on the workings of these structures, it becomes a recipe for resentment. And unfortunately, the economic situation has become worsened. People can no longer even survive. You understand? People are suffering from lack of access to justice. It's only about 30% of the population of Sierra Leone that have access to the formal justice structures. Yes, the government has tried. They have introduced the free education program. of which about 22% of the government national budget, GDP is going towards that. But then there is free education program, but then there are no job opportunities. The economic situation is there. Foreign direct investment is limited. Sierra Leone is a country that is abound with natural resources. We have over 14 minerals of exploitative value, but the government earns not more than 3% from all of those. Not more than 3% comes from government revenue. The rest are being siphoned. There's transnational organized criminal activities. You understand? I mean, people don't have access to health facilities. Of course, the situation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine has worsened the living standards of the common man in Sierra Leone, or even the middle class person. So people always say that Sierra Leone is a classist society. You have the rich and the extreme poor. So all of these things you are seeing, these resentments we are seeing, and we also have the political class who have this mindset of state capture. Some have gone, they have come, they have amassed their wealth, they have left office, but they're still interfering with the politics of the state. They still want to maintain their strangled political hold in order to control their wealth. Like this could have happened. I mean, investigations that are initially coming out, they have been linked to former rulers. You understand? To former rulers who wanted to maintain their stranglehold on power. So all of these kinds of things are manifesting themselves. And then leading up to the 2023 elections, the environment in Sierra Leone was very, very toxic. Very, very toxic. There was high level of political intimidation, the dominant political parties. There was high level of political intolerance. And we have the kind of political scenario in Sierra Leone where I have this winner takes it all syndrome. The party that comes into power enjoys all the spoils, all the gains, all the access to state resources, and some political parties or some politicians have taken politics as a way of life, and they don't have any fallback position. Because of this winner takes it all syndrome, has made politics very aggressive, very unaccommodating, and very violent. Because politicians don't want to sit on the bench for 5 years, looking at their opponents enjoying, so to speak. So all of this creates the kinds of resentment. And added to that also, there were contentions about the outcome of the 2023 elections results, based on recommendations, observations that came out. But those are contentious issues. But when you give the opposition the mindset, the leverage, that yes, you understand, there were irregularities, then you embolden them, you understand? And when also from evidences that have been adduced, there are certain foreign powers. We are actually bent on regime change, you understand? And even funding civil society organizations to perpetuate that. It creates resentment. It creates a lot of resentment. So going forward, after the coup, we need a national discussion as a country. We need a national discussion. One, we need to imbibe this whole question of social cohesion and political tolerance. The body politics in Sierra Leone is very, very toxic at the moment. We need a national discussion, what you call a national consensus building around some of these issues. Political participation, political inclusion, you understand? And even the governance mechanisms within the state. This winner takes it all syndrome is not really healthy for a democracy. These are issues that we have to observe. And then going forward, we have to address issues related to accountability. There's no impunity. You understand? If those who are found to have engaged in this coup plot should be accountable for their actions. We should not encourage any question of impunity. You understand? If you are talking about the rule of law, we have to strictly follow the rule of law. We don't have to set up kangaroo courts, but of course the outcomes for those who have been found guilty of having taken part in such a coup should not be allowed to go scot-free. Of course, there should be sanctions. There should definitely be sanctions. Then we should also try to make very conscious and deliberate efforts to try and depoliticize state institutions. We have politicized state institutions a lot, even in terms of appointments, in terms of transfers, in terms of promotions. Loyalty is now based on loyalty to a party. So most people don't even consider themselves again as career public servants, that you must belong to a party to survive. We have to detoxicate that. We've gone through a comprehensive security sector reform program that has stagnated for the last 5, 7, 8, 10 years. because of lack of funding. The sector needs to be sufficiently capacitated. We need to go back to depoliticize the accountability and governance institutions that we set up. All of these institutions that were set up have been politicized by successive governments, which is a worrisome development for us. We need to harness
I'll come back to you for you to have the final word, right? But let me go to Dr. Ademu. Based on what Mr. Ferry has actually put forward, the historical background, what they have gone through over the years, starting from 2017, 2007, there were some changes over there. Now, doesn't the economic situation in Sierra Leone offer that the military, right, coup as a low fruit that they can easily take advantage of, looking at what is happening internally, right? He's alluding to situations about what political leaders trying to have stranglehold on the country. So there's some sort of politics going on, and the military, which is supposed to be at the barracks. Historically, if we know that what the military consider themselves to be the guardians of African democracy, because they transition from military to what? Democracy. So they see themselves as guardians. Given the political situation, the economic situation, the disillusionment, and all these things going on, doesn't that be the military that's right for them to actually do a coup d'etat instead of them thinking that, okay, we swore an oath to the Constitution and we have to abide by it? Isn't that the issue that we have in Sierra Leone?
You're on mute.
Okay, excellent. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. It was quite interesting hearing my co-panelists speak about, the political situation in Sierra Leone. And I mean, this is a reflection of a lot of countries in Africa.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately. And so when, he severally, I heard him referring to what he called a comprehensive security sector reform. And so I asked myself the question, how do we measure the effectiveness of a security sector reform? If that security sector reform does not completely, as it were, allow the military or the security forces to subject themselves to the democratic tenets, then perhaps there's an issue with that security sector reform. And yes, it's very difficult to separate the consequences of poor governance or political mismanagement, as it were, and then the economic indices that we're seeing in most African continent. They are very much related. If the political class has captured the instruments of state, and they are using those instruments of state to meet their personal interest and not necessarily national interest, then the likelihood is we are going to see a lot of socioeconomic challenges. And then coupled with the geopolitical development that have subjected Africa to the current circumstances that it's finding itself, the Russia-Ukraine war, the pandemic, and then more recently the Israeli-Hamas war, and of course the effect on commodity prices, on energy, and all of that. And then of course even the consequences of some of the geopolitical issues that we've talked about earlier on, the health conflict or competition between the Western countries, Russia, China, as it were, and its effect on Africa. Now, with all of this, it would be almost impossible and very difficult for any military personnel who is interested in capturing the state not to see economic indices as low-hanging fruits. And so it takes us back to that conversation. What is the effectiveness? And I'm very excited that we're discussing these issues within the prism of US involvement in the African continent. What has been the effectiveness of the security sector reform component that we know the US government has effectively and over the last 30 years has attempted to instill within most African countries? If immediately after the coup in Niger, I have been on platforms where I've had several military serving or retired, still expressing that desire, as it were, and the authority, as if it was, an institutional privilege that the military has to be the savior where the civilians are unable, for instance, to meet. So I think we need to really interrogate this. What is the effectiveness of a security sector reform within this development that we've discussed? If I use Nigeria as an example, there are so many issues within the security sector that, yes, we've pursued security sector reform. We are discussing elements of that security sector reform at the moment. We are looking at issues around compliance with international humanitarian and other laws within the security sector. We're also discussing quite extensively the issues of security sector governance. And this is, I think, an issue that cuts across several African countries that we need to interrogate more closely and ask ourselves if the US, as an example, has put this issue and on the front burner as one of its core objectives, then why haven't we seen, in my opinion, the effectiveness of security sector reform in most African countries, where, as I said earlier on, the US has strong bilateral as well as multilateral influence.
Thank you so much, right? Thank you for the way you contextualized everything. I think we really appreciate that. Now, let me come back to Mr. Francis. You have the last word, so let me go to Lieutenant Corker, right? Now, from the analysis that Dr. Ademo gave, I just want to bring in a different narrative, right? If you look in the case of Sierra Leone, we don't know the names of those people who were actually involved, right? In terms of those at the top. Right, we've seen a couple of people who are probably low military officers, so we can't say that. But if you look recently, most of the coup d'etat in the Sahel and the West African regions normally involve people at the top, right? But historically, coup d'etat normally come from bottom up. But what we are seeing now is top down. What could be the reason for this new development, where we have people who are the top echelons, they are the one causing the coup d'etat compared to those who used to be at the bottom. Like I said, we don't know the situation of Sierra Leone, unless probably we might get more information. But from what we saw in terms of the prison break and things like that, there were just people at a lower level. What could be this new development happening in Africa, and especially in the case of Sierra Leone? We would let Mr. Kelly have the last word. What could be the reason why this is going on in the Sahel and West African sub-regions?
In response, while neither I or most will know for sure or can know for sure, we can do some educated speculation. And so, my speculation is, as it connects to an earlier comment about the role that France has played in this throughout the Sahel, and also kind of supported by the U.S. government. And in this regard, again, the good news is both governments kind of believed were convinced that they were doing the right things for the right reasons in the right ways. But even though our best planning on this may not in fact kind of deliver the result as desired. Now, my suspicion is that in those countries, in the Sahel, be it with Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger and so forth, it was readily apparent that of U.S. support to French forces and operations was readily apparent. And I'm then not sure if to what extent. Well, obviously that did not sit well with the military authorities in those countries, and as a result, they made their decision to discontinue the entire operation, to withdraw the French forces and also the French presence, and then to take charge themselves in the manner they thought most appropriate. So that's again just an educated guess on the top down, in contrast to what you have seen in the past, and also in what you have seen in Guinea with someone other with what we have called a field grade officer kind of taking control, not the head of the Guinean military. So that would be it. In terms to Brother Adamu's response, I will just address this security sector reform and effectiveness. And particularly because he talks about U.S. supporting that effectiveness. I couldn't agree with him more about there being the need to measure that effectiveness. It's also with the U.S. support to the entire TSCTP, and that's one of the reasons why that particular effort experienced some problems, is because at the time we had not instituted as a monitoring and observation or evaluation metrics to ascertain effectiveness of the program and if it was being done properly. And likewise with security sector reform, wherever it's applied, there, in addition to going through all it, doing, instituting all the activities and processing it, and ended up giving the appearance that it is working, there is still a need to inject, if you will, a specific mechanism to do that check. And some people may refer to it as a spot check. Some people may refer to it as just another check. There may be some value in doing it as from an independent third party. Mr. Kelly and Freetown there talked about the UK kind of coming in as part of this work. That's a kind of a neutral, balanced, independent, say, come in and check. When in the military, when we do it, we have in the Marine Corps, we have what we call combat readiness exercises. And so we have to go under realistic simulation circumstances to say, hey, is this unit ready to go into, to deploy to combat? In your context, as we said earlier, we're talking, your focus of attention is peace support operations, and peacekeeping operations. Is whatever that unit ready? And so, and there's a check, going into it. There's a check midstream, and there's a check maybe years or so later. So there is certainly space for it. I would also offer that just from democracy, and with militaries being guardians of democracy. I'm not sure that I buy into that. I buy into military doing military things. And so what is the question is, what is the military mission for that? Now, we talked about, the U.S. and the U.S. Priority is deterrence. And so the deterrence is against a major superpower. And so and I don't know that the primary mission is promotion or protection of democracy. There is the so that's just again and how they are defining their terms. And so now with it, and that's just, I think this is also where a lot of African countries get into trouble, is because kind of the military takes on this mantle of guardian of democracy, that they insert themselves in a civil society and the civil functioning of government and so forth. And so while they're trying to do things well intended, they may in fact are doing the exact opposite. I don't know if it's the right answer or the wrong answer, but in our White House and in our presidency, we have civilians protecting the president. We don't have the military. And so, our military is not concentrated in Washington, D.C. and there many of the units are so far removed that it would take a while to get here. In contrast, you know, the military in Africa is with a stone's throw of the capitals and the state house, and so in my language that it looks like low hanging fruit. It's an easy opportunity to go in and assert yourself, even if you're not called. So those are just some of my thoughts.
All right, thank you very much for your contribution. Right, let me come back to Mr. Francis Wright. Now, I think Dr. Demo mentioned the issue of the effectiveness, right, of the security sector reform. And Mr. Coker also mentioned the TSCTP, which is basically Trans-Saharan Counterterrorism Partnership, right? Now, last week, we had a discussion where this program was actually, this program which is supposed to oversee terrorism in that part of the region, the OAG, which is the Office of Inspector General of the Defense Department, said there was a lot of corruption, right, in these programs. Would you make the argument that probably the corruption, we took a huge chunk of resources that was supposed to be invested into the security sector for it to be actually reformed, would be a reason why it could not apply to your situation in terms of the effectiveness of security sector reform in Sierra Leone, as Dr. Ademu indicated?
Well, I think a couple of points. For me, not only in Sierra Leone, but within the West African context, the greatest determinant to a very comprehensive and effective security sector reform and governance program is the political will. If the political will is not there, whatever level of international support you have is not going to work. I've seen manifestations of those. The political will is the greatest determinant to the effectiveness of a security sector reform and governance program. Why am I saying this? Why am I saying this? Our heads of states in Africa, let me not limit it to even West Africa, our heads of states in Africa have unlimited powers, unlimited, so to speak, conferred on them by most of these constitutions. And the checks and balances, you know, that are inherent in some of these constitutions are not really non-applicable to most of our heads of states. In terms of appointments, in terms of promotions, in terms of transfers to most of these institutions that are supposed to serve as checks and balances, I've seen presidents tell you, I don't believe in professionalism, I believe in political loyalty. And all of those appointments are done by the heads of states. There's no committee that does that, a one-man show. He sits down and says, I've seen heads of states in terms of recruitment to certain offices who will say, I need no group of persons from these regions to be recruited into that institution. I've seen that, heads of states writing. You understand? I've seen heads of states to tell you, I don't believe in professionalism in terms of recruitment. I need these sets of people to, as my tribesmen, to fill these positions within the security sector institutions. And when you see those things happening unabated, when you see those things happening unchecked, and when the Constitution confers, legally confers the appointment of those office holders, you know, confers it on one individual who serves as commander-in-chief, who serves as fountain of honor, who serves all the titles in the land, whatever kind of international leverage or tutelage you might want to have on your SSR program will not be effective. Like, for instance, we talked in Sierra Leone, yes, when the UK came, you had the initial political will. Then we had the presence of the UK government. They provided the technical advice, working with us in all of our sector institutions. In fact, post-conflict, we even had an inspector general, a British-born inspector general of police, Kit Bidu, for about 6 years immediately after our war. You had the British working in IMAT, even for us in ONS. When we are recruited, we had advisors that we worked in for 11 years, you know, to ensure that there are checks and balances, you know, within those structures, you know. But at the end of the day, you cannot continue to be relying on donor funding. Donor funding has to wear out. And when the government and when donors tell you that we must have an exit strategy to SSR, By the time the exit strategy is taking place, the government should take up its corresponding responsibility, and the government refuse to take up that corresponding responsibility. Then when they exit, your whole reform program becomes stagnated, or you begin to retrogress. That is what is happening with most of our SSR programs. And when you begin to see, of course, corruption sets in unabated, security sector is not funded. The security sector institutions are highly politicized. They are tribalized. They are ethnically based, even in terms of recruitment. You understand? So whatever you might have gone through with the exits of your international partners, you begin to revert to the status quo ante. And that is what exactly is plaguing most of our institutions. And when you look at, like, for instance, the coup you are alluding to in Sierra Leone, you understand? The proponents of those coups were not even serving military officers. They were not serving military officers. Most of them have been bandits. They were serving as thugs, bodyguards to ex-presidents. They went into exile. They galvanized them, funded them. They wanted to infiltrate the military, saying, well, your position is backward. We are going to create more opportunities for you. Infiltrating the military to broke into the armory and give them arms. They didn't even have arms. And the military officers who refused, we are now testifying and said we refuse, and they reported them. So they were more or less bandits. So that was why they were not able to succeed. It was not well planned. It was not well orchestrated. It was not within the mainstream of the military. They only came and wanted to galvanize, on tribalism, on regionalism, to prey on the economic realities on the ground, to say, we are coming to pay you more. Can you join us? If we break into the prison, if the prisoners come out, we bring them out, they will join us. But all of those did not happen. So it was quelled down within a space of 3-4 hours. It was quelled down. So it's that kind of scenario, but when you have this greed and grievance, when you have society that is deprived, when you have youths that are hungry for survival, they easily fall prey. So what I'm saying is that in terms of our SSR, the first 6 years, it was measured. It was actually measured. It was quite effective, but it only worked for between 2002 to 2007. After 2007, forget it. It was highly politicized. The political will was not there. There was blatant political interference. And that is what we are still grappling with. So that is the status.
Yeah, I wanted to give you the last word. Let me go to Dr. Demu. It seems like your argument that the effectiveness, but he is making the argument it has to do with the political will of the political leader. How do we get the political leaders, right, to have the political will to do this SSR reforms? How do we get to that? Well, it seems like this is an issue across the whole of Africa. How do we get to that, to get at effectiveness?
Yeah, so I think it's unfortunately the proverbial case of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Is there a need for political support for security sector reform? Yes, and I think it's all about advocacy. It's also about a recognition that the status quo, as it were, cannot continue. And I think in my engagement with some politicians, there is that realization. It's becoming very obvious to most African leaders that the status quo cannot contain. You still have a significant component of leadership within the African continent that are yet to realize that. And so a lot of advocacy. And then I think in the course of our conversation, we spoke about performance measurement. And I think this is something that the Nigerian government has introduced, the current government. In November this year, the president introduced performance measurement and in that instance, consequence management. So I think this is something that most African political leaders should embrace. If I'm right, Kenya also embraced the same thing. And so we need to see more African countries, governments embracing both performance measurement, where M&E components across the sectors, including security sector that we're conversing. And to that extent, I think it's absolutely important. And I was very happy listening to my co-panelist from the US mentioning that they've also introduced a component of M&E as part of their review process. Now, if at the government level that is introduced and it is done judicial. In the case of Nigeria, it started with an executive order, number 13, by the immediate past government. And then this current government has now institutionalized the process by creating a department within the government to implement that process. Now, there are gaps, and this is what worries me. The gaps is one of capacity. Then there are also pushback from within the security sector. And it's simple. It's about, and the conversation is really varied. On the one hand, you have security sector reform. On the other hand, you have security sector governance. But more importantly, it's about, I would say, corruption. I'm looking for a very nice word to say it, but I can't find that nice word. It's about corruption. There is the realization that if this is implemented fully, it would reduce gaps and vulnerabilities that are being exploited to foster corruption. And so naturally, there are elements who are benefiting that would not be comfortable with the institutionalization of that. So I think our development partners, including the US, need to come in to support capacity building so that this process is implemented in a manner that allows, I picked up something from my studies, something that says control, trust is good, but control is better. And I think this is the way to go. Yes, we trust our political leaders, and that is why we elected them, quote and unquote. If we agree that the electoral process in Africa is free and fair, so we elected them. But then, yes, if we trust them with that power, we need to have an element of control to ensure that where they are deviating, we're able to correct them. And I think this performance measurement and consequence management instrument that have been introduced would help doing that. But the second element is the role of the parliament. And I can't emphasize this enough. The oversight function by the parliament, the legislation function by the parliament needs to be strengthened. And when I speak of the parliament, I speak about both the elected members of the parliament as well as the staffers that exist within the parliament. If we develop their capacity, and I think we need to discuss this and come to terms with it. The parliament in most African countries is the least developed of all the three arms of government, for the simple reason that they have been the victims of most of the coup d'etats that have occurred within the African continent. So the strength of the parliament, both in oversight as well as in legislation, is quite weakened. And so if we don't invest in developing that capacity and strengthening their ability to oversight, especially the security sector, then there is no amount of security sector reform that will give us what we want. I know I've spoken about a lot of things, but it's not easy. You can't expect someone who is benefiting from a system to change that system himself. So I don't expect the political will to come on a platter of gold. We have to introduce elements within the system to allow that. And I've spoken about performance measurement, consequence management, as well as the role of the parliament in oversight and legislation.
Right. Thank you very much, right? And we appreciate that contribution. Okay, so let's come back to you. I'm going to create a narrative, then I'll follow up with a question. So the Bureau of African Affairs of the U.S. Department of State, on its website, on bilateral relations with Nigeria in terms of security cooperation in Nigeria, writes, and I quote, Nigeria is an important U.S. security partner in Africa. Nigeria is engaged in intensive efforts to defeat terrorist organizations within its borders, including Boko Haram and ISIS West Africa. U.S. security cooperation to strengthen the capacity of Nigerian security forces and security institutions to respond effectively to these other security threats, while prioritizing avoidance of civilian harm and promoting respect for human rights. Nigeria is a vital member of Defeat ISIS coalition, and in October 2020, Nigeria co-hosted a virtual Defeat ISIS conference with the United States. So this is the US talking. Now, let's proceed. Following up with the US security cooperation with Nigeria and the level of insecurity in Nigeria pre-elections period, Franz Ebenezer Obadari, in the blog post dated May 10, 2022, in the Council of Foreign Relations website, titled, "The Nigerian State is the Greatest Threat to Nigerian Democracy," prior to the elections, questioned, among other things, whether there would be an election in Nigeria next year. Unfortunately, there was an election. But he writes, as political activities across the country heightens in the approach to party politics and presidential primaries at the end of May, ancillary questions are being asked by observers who worry about the election, who worry that the election is a danger of becoming a sideshow to most urgent issues that pertain to the survival of Nigeria as a state. Key among these issues are rampant insecurity, especially widespread kidnapping, random outbreak of violence, a spike in the occurrence of ritual killings, and sporadic attacks by roving bandits. The latter concentrated in, but by no means restricted to the northwestern and north-central parts of the country. Last Sunday, he was writing, 48 people were reported killed after dozens of gunmen on motorbikes stormed 3 villages in the northwestern state of Zamfara, adding to the more than 5,000 slain across the Nigerian northwest since 2018. He continues to write, and he states, across the various levels of government, there is a scant evidence that authorities have a handle on the problem. The passage of legislation by the Nigerian Senate last month outlawing payment of ransom to kidnappers was greeted with condemnation by various groups across civil and political society, who saw it as focusing on the symptom rather than the cause of the problem. The legislation, an amendment to the 2013 Terrorism Act, imposes jail terms of at least 15 years for paying a ransom to free someone who has been kidnapped. For its part, the federal government has been beating its chest about the purchase of attack aircraft and other military equipment worth $1 billion from the US government. Dr. Ademu, given your expertise in risk management, intelligence and national security policy, and strategic specialist with security sector reform, right? Does Nigeria have a national security problem leading to the procurement of military equipment from the West? Or it has a law enforcement problem, which has to do with law enforcement failures to actually take proactive steps to protect lives and properties in Nigeria? Which is which?
Quite interesting, the scenario and then the question. I mean, just to give it context, let me kind of go back to when that article was written, and for the benefit of our listeners, it was written just before the elections. There was an election in Nigeria, a national election in February, and then of course it was followed up by another level of elections in March. We have a winner now, even though at the point the victory was contested by the 2 major opposition. So the premise of that article was actually very wrong. Yes, history has shown that premise was extremely wrong. The elections was held. There is a winner. And the best part for me is that, there was a realization within the electoral process that the outcome of the elections could be contested. And so the judicial process of adjudication was provided for. And that process too has almost been completed, at least for the presidential election, that has been completed. And then of course, at the subnational level, it's still ongoing. Now, that is not to say that lessons have not been learned or that there are no grievances that have emerged as a result of the entire electoral process, from the elections up to the post-election period with the adjudication that I talked about. A lot of lessons have been made. But the good thing is that at least there are institutional processes that have been put in place to receive and then to address these issues. Now, to your question, whether Nigeria has a human security challenge or a national security challenge, I think both, and actually more. There is a human security challenge in Nigeria. And in 2019, Nigeria introduced a new national security strategy where there was an attempt to change the paradigm of the perceiving security, as it were. And that paradigm shift changed the approach from national security, as it were, to human security. And so in the past, the protection of the regime seem to be the focus of national security. But within the precepts of that 2019 National Security Strategy, the components of human security were introduced. So elements around food security, health security, name them, were all introduced. Unfortunately, however, we haven't seen enough of the implementation of the provisions of that strategy. And I think that has been the challenge more or less. But speaking about whether there is a national security challenge or human security challenge, in all the indices were measuring, as it were, human security, Nigeria unfortunately would fail in that regard. Is it the socioeconomic challenges, the unemployment challenge, name them. Even something as simple as the administration of criminal justice, where, as a citizen, or even if you're not a citizen, as long as you are within Nigeria, you expect to have justice. It's extremely difficult to have that. So there is that challenge. But beyond that, there is also a national security challenge where there are several existential challenges within the security space, as it were. So in the Northeast, you have the terrorism challenge that has now moved down to the north central and northwestern part of Nigeria. And then within the northwest and north central, you have the banditry challenge that article referred to. And the last global terrorism index that was released showed clearly that the contributions of that challenge to fatalities within Nigeria is even higher than the terrorism challenge that Nigeria has within the northeast of the country. And so if you move to the southeast of the country, you have a secessionist agitation that has been challenging the supremacy of the use of force by the state. And in fact, it's attacking any symbol of the state with a ferocity that is extremely worrisome. And in the southwest, you have criminal activities, both violent and opportunistic, that are also quite disturbing. Now, a reflection of that is that in all the 36 states of Nigeria and the Federal Capital Territory, you have one or the other form of military or other security operation that is ongoing at the moment. And so what informed the request or the desire to procure military equipment is to address these existential security challenges that I've mentioned. All of them need a level of containment before, for instance, they can be addressed. And I think this is where the argument becomes a little bit diverse. Some of us have said, instead of investing so much in this kinetic aspect of security, why don't you look at the root causes of insecurity that we're all very familiar with? And all of them, to an extent, revolve around good governance. If governance is improved upon, then those drivers of insecurity would be reduced or addressed. And that brings us to the earlier conversation around human security, because a lot of the root causes or drivers of insecurity are actually human security challenges. So if you invest or you improve governance and those root causes of insecurity are addressed, it now reduces the need to have this kinetic component in security. So if you look at the last, I would say, budget of Nigeria for probably the last 8 years, including the 2024 budget, the provision for security is the single most largest provision for all the sectors, including education and health. In fact, there is no other sector that comes near security, and yet the security challenges are increasing. So it begs the question, why? And of course, the simple answer is, instead of the focus on kinetic approach to solving this or containing the security challenge, invest in addressing the root causes of security. And just like I spoke earlier on, the role of the legislature is also absolutely important, the parliament. An argument has arisen to say, if the parliament is carrying out its oversight function in a manner that ensures developmental issues are addressed, holistically, then it reduces this need for containing the security challenges, because the root causes of the security challenges will be addressed, including climate change that we've not discussed, extensively in this conversation. The adaptation and other issues that are required. Provisions are made within the budget, but when you now review, unfortunately, you don't see enough programs that are being implemented, and there is no accountability to say, okay, this is where the money has gone to. So again, for our development partners, and I'm happy where this conversation is around that, this is one area that I think would need to be addressed. Yes, focusing on the security sector without extending it to these other conversations, unfortunately, would just allow a continuation of the cycle that we're currently in to continue.
All right, thank you very much. Let me come to Mr. Kelly. Well, you do not have a huge Muslim population in Sierra Leone, right? But most of the time, experts or scholars from the United States, they tend to securitize Muslim population as a threat, right? As a threat to peace and security, right? And we've seen from the narrative that I created, most of the security in Nigeria is mostly in the north, northwestern, and north central, and that has led to the militarization of security, right? Instead of focusing so much on human security in that part of the region. Would you agree with that analysis that because we have securitized the Muslim population in the north, right, we have an aggressive attitude towards them instead of trying to deal with governance, law enforcement, providing them with economic opportunities? Would you say that could be a contributing factor? Especially when it has to do with the north. You don't have that problem in Sierra Leone, but that could be a contributing factor that we focus so much on national security instead of human security.
Yeah, well, it could be. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for us in Sierra Leone, well, I think if you look at the Freedom of Religion Index, we are the most religiously tolerant country in the world, almost, or second, in terms of intermarriages. Actually, the Muslim population in Sierra Leone far surpasses the Christian population. There are about 70% Muslims that we have, and only about 30% Christians, But the level of religious tolerance, our level of intermarriages does not even create room for that kind of thought. It does not occur at all within our cultural ties or even our socio-cultural religious ties as a country. But when you notice, yes, I mean, there is what we call a northern factor, especially within West Africa. Northern factor, I recall that UNDP was doing a program that they called the Northern Factor. They've noticed that in most of these countries, not only West Africa, the northern regions are actually most times remote in terms of education and penetration, in terms of development, in terms of social services. I don't know whether it's a misconception, but most people sometimes think because these areas are populated by Muslims, and most of them, their way of life, is not too attuned to what we call the so-called Western way of life, which we take certain things for granted, is responsible for that. But then when you look at most of these areas, again, like in Nigeria, of course, where you have the northern concentration of Muslims in the north, and most times you tend to equate, which for me is a misnomer, tend to equate, them with Islam or Boko Haram, because they are Muslims. Naturally, you may have the tendency to actually deploy most of your resources and assets to fight in physical security. So most times you forget about the human security aspect of it. So most people within these communities, are in a catch-22 situation. They are suffering from the Boko Haram syndrome. They are also not benefiting from the services, that government is supposed to give them by way of social service intervention, by way of education, And I'm aware that they also have things that they call mobile schools, because they have these pastoralists, people, they drag them along as they go, seasonal schools that they create for them. So most times, because of these things that are happening, it's not only isolated to Nigeria, but most of these countries that I've seen, there's a tendency for the resources to be most times concentrated on physical security in the northern part of these countries, more than the southeastern parts of this country, where traditionally they are more westernized, they are more attuned to having social services and developmental programs. So it has a tendency of creating a lot of resentment, in these areas. And most times they can easily fall prey to most of these terrorist antics, who preach misguided forms of Islam, for citizens to fall prey within these communities. So I think a conscious and deliberate effort has to be made to imbibe this whole concept of human security, going in tandem with the kinetic, view of security, because there are definitely physical security hiccups that are attendant to those areas. But most times they tend to concentrate on the physical security at the expense of the human security. So most times people within these communities, fall prey and a catch-22 situation to their own government and to Boko Haram. So they feel that they are neglected, they are not part of the governance structures of the state, which is also a recipe for resentment amongst the populations that are attendant within these communities. But we, fortunately for Sierra Leone, yes, we also have this northern factor based on some of these reasons that I've alluded to, but in terms of religious tolerance, in terms of cohabitation, I mean, we are quite perfect, and we do not find those kinds of problems inherent with our body politic.
Thank you very much. Right. Let me come to Lieutenant Corker. Right now, we in the West, let's say Western perception, right, tend to look at, in terms of security, look at ungoverned spaces, right, which creates room for terrorists to serve as safe havens, right, or governing spaces, political instability and Muslim populations. These are the way the West actually securitized security in Africa. Would you say this has also contributed to the way Nigeria is trying to fight the issue of Boko Haram in the North? Because it seems like the North is very huge, very, very huge. It's very, very difficult to govern these spaces, right? And the political leaders don't want to go up over there. So is this a contributing factor that has actually affected Nigeria's way of approaching how to deal with security issues instead of focusing more on human security? It's so much focused on national security.
So thank you for the question. I would have to agree that from the Western approach to their understanding of the dynamics that they have adopted they have used the term ungoverned spaces. Now that said, that's a relative term, and so our one person's perception of a space as ungoverned may not be the same as other people's. So that's it's a semantic issue of the ungoverned space. And I do think that there's because of that conclusion that they then kind of took their action to do something about it. And so that was that's happens to be how things unfolded with the counter Boko Haram effort in, I think, 2014 or 15, where the P3 decided to get involved, and by P3 it's the US, UK, and France. And part of the reasons that they decided to get involved is because they did not they came to the conclusion that either they get involved or the situation will blossom out of control. And if you can recall, Boko Haram, it started out small, but it morphed tremendously. So every week, then into almost on a daily basis, they were claiming they were claiming more and more territory. And so it was they kind of took on a life of its own, this Boko Haram threat. And so and that's kind of what one of the factors involved in addressing Boko Haram, and then addressing IS in West Africa, and also now addressing these other pieces out there. And also with their, as Kelly said, talked about antics and crisis and physical hiccups. I would keep focused on the major security threats and challenges, and so just do not lose sight of the real significant threats. And the real significant threats are the ones that result in population resentment. And those are the threats to the human population, human security challenges. The major human security challenges are in some kind of greater than these hiccups and antics of some misfits or some folks who are kind of poking the bear, so to speak. Keep your eye on the real big problems of the human security throughout the whole region, the poverty, the health, the education. Solve those problems. And then why? Because that's part of the Hearts and Minds campaign in the countries, and the win the public support, and the public support then helps to support policy decisions at the national level. I would say, and to a little bit of clarity about knowing your partner, and knowing your partner with the U.S. And so there right now, the partnership, I don't know if it's constrained, if you will, to D3 that you started with, a couple of hours ago, democracy, diplomacy, and defense. None of those areas are in the governance business. None of those three are in the homeland security business per se. And so so just kind of keep that in perspective. And so when we talk about the struggle to promote democracy or peace and security objectives in the region, we have to say, okay, well, wait a second, what are the peace and security objectives in the region? If the peace and security objectives are the peace and security objectives in the region, really, the violent extremists, or are some of these other interests that you talked about, these human security interests? And if so, is the Department of Defense the proper fit to help to satisfy some of those security challenges? We spoke about earlier also about, what else does the U.S. Potentially have to help? And even with the junta up in Niger, what do they say? The junta for what? Homeland Security. The U.S. has this big Department of Homeland Security, and so you don't have anyone in the panel saying, okay, what is? And I'm not advocating a role for that department. I'm just saying that that's their expertise. And so that's on one. And then the other one, on the governance, diplomats, U.S. diplomats, chiefs of mission don't have the experience in governance. What the U.S. does have is 50 states. And so if African countries want some partnership or fellowship, we have retired governors, we have active governors, we have retired mayors, we have active mayors that can partnership of governance issues, and how they do that at the local level, local, regional, and national level, with African partners. So I would just all that to say, kind of think outside the box and look for some other things, and don't get stuck. One of the major features of the U.S. is their approach and their embrace of innovation. And so think innovatively about some of the issues, and then addressing some of the problems. As we continue this type of a fellowship, I think we can kind of work through and help solve some of the problems and advance.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Demu Asleva, let me come to you, Mr. Francis. Right, now we're talking about focusing on human security, and we know there are issues, indicators, for example, poverty level, right, in most African countries, and look at Nigeria. If you look, for example, youth unemployment, right, these are threats to the state. If you look, for example, debt crisis, right, these are serious indicators of African countries. How do we fight human security? How do we deal with human security if we have all these problems, all these challenges, poverty, debt crisis, youth unemployment, education and training? How do we navigate all these things whilst we're talking about what? Human security.
Well, I think we have to change, they have to change the mindset of the political class to understand that when you talk about security, you are talking about both freedom from fear, which is the physical security, kinetic, and freedom from want. And what you do when you are designing policies and programs, that relates to security sector governance or living the governance of the state, you should make a deliberate and conscious effort to ensure that these policies and programs are embedded within your governance structures. And that is at Sierra Leone level, when we began our SSR, that was exactly what we did. Yeah, because when we did our threat assessment, as I told you entirely, it indicated to us that 90% of our threats are human security related and only 10% physical. So what we are doing was any policy or programs that we are profiling to the president as chairman of the National Security Council, we are geared towards profiling policies related to health security, related to economic security. So we are looking at issues that are over around smuggling, issues that are over around lack of access to justice. So we do researches. We have a whole directorate that deals with research and assessment directorates that go around and partner with these institutions. Like you have the strategic situation group that I'm also chairing as chief of staff. It's also a think tank that is multi-sectoral. So we meet on a fortnightly basis. We look at issues that hover around the governance of the state, from political inclusion to electoral to justice sector. So we look at all of these issues and we develop policy options for the attention of the president, who is chairman of the National Security Council. So even when we go for our presidential briefings at National Security Council level, these are the policy options that we prefer, that we submit to him. And in most of these councils, in terms of membership, we've made a deliberate effort to bring in the ministers who oversee these ministries. Like, for instance, if we bring in something that relates to health security, the Minister of Health sits there. The Minister of Agriculture and Food Security sits in the National Security Council. So when policies and programs are developed and designed, we presented to them, they are deliberated upon, and then when it goes back, it ensures that they are mainstream with it in ministry. They are not looked upon as purely a security issue, but as a byproduct of security if they are not addressed. So these are the kinds of interventions that we have been having. But then unfortunately, you can have that on paper, but then when they go, they just put it on the shelf. So that's why I said the political will has to be there and the constant orientation has to be there. But we made it a deliberate and conscious policy and effort to ensure that in all of our security sector deliberations, human security is at the heart of it. It's at the heart of all of our security sector policy development and policy options that we develop for the attention of the president and his cabinet ministers, who, by the way, are members of what we call the National Security Council. And that National Security Council is the highest forum for the formulation and determination of all security policy issues for Sierra Leone. And in our SSR, we did define security, what we refer to as security, which I alluded to as freedom from fear and freedom from want. So that was the entry point that we had. But then everything rests on the political commitment to carry it forward.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so as we come to the end of the program, I want to get your closing remarks, starting with Lieutenant Corker, your closing remarks before we go to the program.
Thank you again for a very fascinating discussion and covering the issues. I hope that we did an adequate job. I would just one more, what we call an alibi, not an afterthought, but something that is pertinent, and that is just a reminder of President Biden and when he came to office a few years ago. What did he do? In the U.S., an economic recovery plan. That was first and foremost were the American people, the American workers, the American families. Economic recovery plan. He put money directly into the pockets of every American, period. And that was one of his first actions. The second action was what? It was an infrastructure plan. Infrastructure plan. And so, I mean, we're talking huge numbers up in the trillions of dollars. And so, and again, those are human security issues for the U.S. And so, yeah, we take care of the people first, and then those other things, because we need the people then to kind of take care of the state. And so that's just been the kind of the U.S. modus operandi for some time. But in terms of your security, in terms of the U.S. and assertiveness throughout the region, I hope we were able to get a clearer or a different kind of assessment of how things are going there. And I hope you were also able to see other areas or other avenues to pursue. I think with this monitoring and evaluation, it's also important. And also again, moving away from the decades of military experience, just to focus on the civilian leadership. And so, in addition to the political will, my friend Kelly was mentioning political will and national leadership. So that it starts from the top, and so and that's those are the ones who are responsible for guiding the country and for securing national interests. Thank you for the time.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Mr. Kelly. You're the last word.
Yeah, briefly. Yeah, in summing up, let me know that if as Africans we do not make a deliberate and conscious effort to imbibe human security as part of our governance discourse, if we do not make the conscious effort to ensure electoral credibility within the electoral landscape, if we do not make a conscious effort to imbibe the politics of inclusivity as Africans, inclusivity, if we do not make the conscious effort to ensure security sector professionalism, if we do not make the conscious effort to ensure the prudent governance of our natural resources to the betterment of our citizens, if we don't make the effort to ensure that we try and address the youth factor in terms of employment and underemployment and youth population explosion, then the resurgence of coups will become the norm rather than the exception. I think I'll pause here for now. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you very much. So for our listeners all around the world, this where we come to the end of another edition of the Sankofa African series. I take the opportunity to thank Lieutenant Corker, Mr. Kelly, and Colonel Festus Abuaji for joining us. We're looking forward to have me next week. On this note, I will say good afternoon from the US and good evening in GMT time in Sierra Leone and in Nigeria and in Ghana. All right, so see you next week to our listeners. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan.